There's only, what, 20 points now? 22 points between Max and...
Between Oscar and Lando, it's 13. Between
Yeah.
Oscar and Max, it is 22. So it's
So, yeah. So, I
one
mean...
one McLaren double DNF, and we are golden.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
I think this title fight is too... It's still way too close to call, which is interesting.
Also one big factor, and I think we are all sleeping on it.
Russell.
Yeah, you might laugh at this one, but I think if Ferrari fixes its qualifying, I think Ferrari might. I know, but I think if Ferrari
they're not going to win the championship, but you're saying they might influence it.
Leclerc might become a major factor because that car was. If you take the tire life into consideration, I think Leclerc was at par with Max and
like in the
Lando.
race, that car was blazingly quick.
There are a lot of things going on.
It seems like Red Bull have actually done something, which is good.
Yeah, I mean, they do a lot of things. They don't get credit for it because...
because everyone just thinks that the Red Bull's actually a Haas that Max is driving to the front, which is...
No. Sauber.
Yeah. Sauber. Yeah.
Don't you try and diminish what Max is doing, okay?
Yeah, I mean, I still think... I guess we'll just jump straight into this. I still think McLaren have the fastest car overall. However,
of course.
It is a fact now, though, that the Red Bull was actually the marginally faster car this weekend, which is insane.
Yeah, I agree. And I think for me, the biggest thing was that the tire deck, they've done it.
Yeah. In terms of speed, I wasn't overly surprised because unlike a lot of people, what I've seen is the Red Bull at some weekends is almost on par with the McLaren to the point where the McLaren is not that far ahead. We saw this at Suzuka. Suzuka's got those fast flowing corners. So we assumed the Red Bull would be, because of those fast flowing corners, relatively close this weekend. But the tire deg, as you said, that is the big thing because it was very hot and we all assumed that McLaren would just get away. But it seems like with these upgrades, they've kind of
not only it being very hot, but also being a high dig race. This was a race which was basically degradation was one of the factors that actually determined how the race went. Yeah. And one thing that stood out for me was, so for me, the expectation was, okay, Oscar, probably the biggest litmus test when it comes to Red Bull and its upgrades, it was the moment Oscar pitted. And you had Max and Lando pretty much in a straight head-to-head. Ideally, you can say a lot of things about Lando, but when it comes to showing what the car can do in a race, I think he's a decent benchmark. The gap was around 10 seconds when Oscar jumped into the pits between Max and Lando. Yeah. It didn't fluctuate much. Maybe a second at max, but that's it.
If anyone wants to, you can bash on Lando for a few things. It's the high pressure moments where Lando seems to constantly fall apart. Yeah. But when you look at his just race pace is not one of those situations. So race pace is just you get into a rhythm, and Lando is very, very, very fast. Every single time where Max has been ahead, Lando has been catching him, and it's those, in Suzuka, it was the dirty air, and we even saw Oscar behind him, couldn't do anything with the dirty air. In Miami, Lando was catching Oscar as the thing went on, as the stint went on. So, but if we look at the tire wear, for me, it was before the safety car, not the virtual safety car, the safety car. Lando was he was 18 seconds behind, and over the course of 8 laps, he caught from, I think, 20 seconds down to 18, I think it was, or 18.5.
Yeah, something.
So you're talking a second and a half over 8-9 laps. It was nothing. It was a couple of tenths here and there.
And Max was managing as well. It wasn't that he was just going hell for leather or something like that.
Oh, and even at points, it went back up, it came down, it went back up. So that tells you he was managing. So yeah, look, I think when we get to tracks where there's more traction zones, where it's more rear limited, we're going to see the McLaren still have the edge. I think that's where the difficulty is.
It is rear limited, right?
No, it's more front limited, I think. No, because there's less traction zones. It's more high speed.
Yeah, of course, it is high speed, but
it's close.
I'd say it was a decent test. I mean, I'd say it was still a decent test for... Even if we take that into consideration, because
it's not as bad as Bahrain, let's put it that way. Bahrain has a lot of traction zones.
Bahrain is basically Bahrain, and to a certain extent even Miami. Those are your tracks where
very rear limited. Yeah.
So look, why Red Bull why Max sneaked into why Max was as competitive in qualifying and still I'd say relatively competitive in the race. It comes down to Red Bull's proficiency in the fast speed sections, and again it was the first sector where he just nailed it. There's still something that the Red Bull leaves on the table in the second, third sector, which was something that I feared as well, because McLaren tends to have a better ability when it comes to keeping a hold of its tires.
Yeah.
Plus, the traction zones and the slow speed sections is where McLaren tends to succeed.
Yeah.
That's what it just balanced out to a large extent. But yeah,
One thing I would say on that I noticed is I do think that perhaps there is a situation where in qualifying, Max put a lot more through the tires in the first section because he knew that's where the advantage was. And maybe that is the case of not having full faith in the upgrades, because it seemed like in the race then he wasn't doing that. Like it did seem to
he was
calm down.
surprised. He didn't
Yeah.
expect to win or have that kind of pace.
So
And
I think he put a lot of power through the tires in the first sector, thinking
I think he messed up.
that's where the
I
advantage
think
is.
it's Oscar being just look in the very first sector. Oscar improved by 3 tenths in on that final run. Max
Okay,
improved
yeah.
by a couple of tenths. And the entire advantage that Max had was in the first sector. So Oscar
Yeah.
nailed his, at least for himself, nailed his perfect first sector, and that set it up for him.
Yeah,
Max
yeah.
had a purple sector one. He was a couple of tenths up on his benchmark, but then S2 and S3 were slower because the car just couldn't handle it. But
Yeah,
Oscar was able to manage it. So again, kudos to Oscar because that was a brilliant lap. That's why I kind of said that. And again, even if Oscar finished behind Max and Lando in the race, I think Oscar has pulled away from Lando in terms of the driver who I'd expect to have not only the ability to nail the crunch moments, but also pull out special laps, because that was a special lap with which he beat
Yep.
Max.
he just seems far more comfortable now with everything, and I'm not sure if that's maybe some of the upper limitations of the car don't suit Lando's driving style. Like, who knows, to be honest, because you're talking about literally the last, like, it's not like there's miles between them, but you're talking about the last tenth or two. Yeah. And that's where you need to be properly comfortable with the car. Like, we see this with even like Yuki, for example. I know this weekend's not a great example, but like we see Yuki, for example, Q1, Q2, he's kind of in and around, kind of a couple of tenths of Max. And then it's like when you get to that last, like, okay, we need to get into the last kind of tenth or two of the car, Yuki just falls apart. And that we see that all the time in qualifying. We saw it last year with Hamilton against Russell as well. Like Hamilton just couldn't access that kind of last upper element of the car. And yet in the races, he was very quick. Kind of similar thing with Lando now. And that a lot of that shows like he's just not comfortable. He's not gelling with this car.
Yeah.
And unfortunately for Lando, when Lando gets flustered, it seems everything just goes wrong. Like we talked about, his mental issues is the wrong word.
Low.
But yeah. Whereas
That's the
Oscar
biggest problem.
just kind of gets over it and moves on,
The best example, something that I liked about Oscar was when the race ended, he walked up to Max and shook his hand. It was an acknowledgement of, okay, yeah, by the way, we'll also talk about the overtake. But it was the acknowledgement of, yeah, you got me there. And that's fine.
Oscar wasn't expecting that at all.
Yeah. But the biggest contrast is if it was Lando who actually had that happen to him, he would have been depressed.
Yeah.
Right. He would have taken it a bit too harshly on himself. And I think that's where there's a difference between Lando and Oscar, because what Oscar can do is he compartmentalizes and understands that there will be moments where basically he'll lose. There will be moments where Max would get him, while Lando has the kind of expectation that every moment he has to win and he has to be perfect, and that's just not how racing works.
Hey, just a quick interruption, because we have a problem here, which is that for the last few months, we've been saying that if you're offended, subscribe. We've kind of been saying that. We've been saying if you're not offended, don't subscribe. It's the same thing. I'm sure you understand English if you're watching this, so you've got it, I'm sure. But turns out 60% of you have not been offended. And I just can't sleep. I don't know about you, Casual, but I just can't sleep at night knowing that we haven't offended 60% of the audience. I think we need to start. You sleep okay? Well, I haven't, because there are 7.5% of you are Indians that haven't been offended. For example, I think we just need to fix this. So I'm just going to take a minute of your time to just make sure that everyone watching this is thoroughly offended. So I've written down a couple of things, Casual, and you can tell me if you think this is offensive enough. So let's offend those Hindus and Indians first, quickly.
Oh, Jesus. Okay. Oh, Jesus, no. Don't, don't do that.
Is that too offensive? No? Okay.
You don't live in India.
Yeah.
And I'm not a Hindu.
Right.
Yeah.
Is that offensive? So that is offensive then?
That's not only offensive, that's going to get me lynched. So please don't do that.
All right. Well, I'll think about cutting it out afterwards. Is there? By the way, 15% of you watching are British, and I'd just like to say that your sports cars now are so gay that the best selling model is the LGBT. No? Offensive? No?
Maybe.
And of course, the 20% of Americans here, there's no need to insult you because you'll just do what you always do, which is show up after everyone else has done the hard work. So we'll probably cut that Hindu joke out, should we?
Yes.
Yeah? What I'll do is...
I'm still too young to die.
Okay. So... If you have been offended, please subscribe. If you haven't, then tell us how we can offend you and we'll subscribe you. And if a lot of Indian people subscribe, we'll maybe show you a behind the scenes of what that joke was at some point. Thank you, everybody. Now back to the podcast.
I think, just coming back to it, for me, okay, before anything else, I think a lot of people would be actually angry in the comments that we've still not mentioned the overtake. So let's talk about it. What's your take on that one?
Incredible move, like classic Max as well, to even surprise Oscar and surprise himself, according to Max too. Like it's just one of these things where if you leave any space whatsoever for Max Verstappen, sometimes you don't even have to leave space, let's be honest. But if you leave any sort of opportunity for Max, he's going to take it. And to be fair, like to surprise Oscar Piastri in that respect is not easy as well, because Oscar is also that type of kind of aggressive driver. I think a couple of factors here were in on this. I think one, like, obviously, all praise to Max for it. It was spectacular. I think he just saw the opportunity because it was clear that Oscar was taken off guard a little bit by Russell, I think. I think he thought, right, I've gotten a better run from Max, so I now have to cover off Russell, who's coming up behind, so I can't, move over to the right. I think if Russell hadn't have been there, he was kind of going to close it off maybe to the other side, or maybe he just thought, look, I've got the inside covered. It's too hard to lunge around the outside with these rules. And he was clearly taken off guard. And then I also think as well, Oscar, just once that happened, is like, well, I can't force him off now because one, he's earned the space, but even if he does, it's like, Max is coming from behind. So he probably thinks like, oh, Max can't take as many risks as I can. I think it's interesting. I think it's going to play out differently as we go forward. I think Oscar is very much one to learn from these very quickly. So I think, it's going to be interesting to see these two go head to head, but it was a brilliant move from Max. I wonder too, when he saw Max come around the outside, was he less aggressive? Because in an interview before the race, Oscar basically said he's not that worried about turn one because he said basically he thinks we'll have the tire wear to kind of fight them back. So I'm not too worried about the opening stint, like it's going to be a long race. And that maybe was ingrained in his head as well. And that's why he wasn't as aggressive. I think if he knew the tire wear wasn't there, I think he probably wouldn't have given any space on coming into turn two and would have probably ran him out the whole way. So I think it's a confluence of factors, but it's just another example of just fucking Max just doesn't give an inch, and it's fantastic, spectacular racing, And for anyone who says what I diss Verstappen fans about is Red Bull have built a brilliant car. That doesn't take away from the fact of how good of a racer and how brilliantly he extracts every inch of that car. Another spectacular.
It's just the kind of magic that Max brings, right? I mean, there are moments just every race and every time, and the frequency with which he can produce these moments, it's so rare. There aren't many drivers on the F1 grid that can do that this often, but he does. He does it every time he gets an opportunity, and it's like I understand. I think the door opened for him, and he had not expected it to open. I think probably it was down to the fact that George had the best start out of the top three.
Yeah.
It seemed obvious that, and once that happened, Oscar thought, okay, I have Max covered, and then on this side I have George, and Oscar wasn't giving an inch at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
The three were just boxed together.
Yeah.
And from that point, it was his entire focus was behind, and the door just opened for Max. I don't think he even had time to react or anything about Max.
No.
But just this way and just gone.
Oscar was asked afterwards, what would you do differently if you started again?
Break it.
And he said break 10 minutes later or something.
Yeah.
Like realistically, I think it was just brilliant by Max. You could tell it because he took Oscar just completely off guard. Because realistically, yeah, if Oscar had been focused on what Max was doing there, he would have just braked later, and then Max couldn't go around the outside because this isn't like a runoff area where you can self-forced off. You're in the gravel, you're gone. So
yeah.
I think, yeah, it was a ballsy move as well by Max, because if Oscar had have seen it and had the time to react and let off the brakes there, that would have been an all or nothing move as well.
Yeah, again,
but it was just brilliant.
And I think that's where probably Oscar was at a back foot, because he cannot afford a DNF.
No. Well,
Max doesn't care. Yeah, he cannot. He was 60.
Maybe,
If Oscar and Max, they both of them just DNF, you have Lando winning the race. More or less, I don't think there's any doubt about that.
The point, though, is I think Oscar, if he had seen that, like, he could have. That's the brilliance of it, because obviously Oscar just didn't see it, and like nobody saw it. It was just a brilliant move.
Yeah, nobody. But, it's like when Max sent it down around the outside, I like, is he going to make it? And it was precision, that there's no room for error, nothing, and he just nailed it perfectly. The
thing is, if Oscar had seen it, Oscar had enough. Oscar was in the perfect position to push him off and still make the corner. So I think, if he had a break, he just didn't. That's why it was such a. This is just, the thing about Max that is brilliant is just goes back to what Clarkson said about Senna. I think that's what makes Max, for me, a better driver than Hamilton. Or because I always say greatest driver since Schumacher. People are, what about Lewis Hamilton? I'm like, what about Vettel? I mean, like, there's tons of examples. But what Clarkson said about Senna just translates here, which is, like, Vettel was brilliant so many times, for example. Lewis has been brilliant so many times. But like Senna, Verstappen is brilliant every time. And that's what makes him spectacular. Schumacher was the same. Just, Schumacher and Senna, every time they were on track, you knew it was spectacular. You knew nothing was being left on the table. And that's the thing with Max. And it goes back to, again, why Red Bull deserve credit, because Red Bull are giving him a car that he can extract the limit from every single time. And Max deserves credit because he extracts the fucking limit every time.
Out of it, yeah.
He doesn't leave anything on the table. And to do that every weekend, like, it's literally easier to list the weekends where he doesn't do that because there are so few.
There aren't any.
There's the only one that jumps to mind recently is Hungary last year. Jeddah, where he messed up the start. Well, he didn't understand the rules had changed somehow. But yeah.
By the way, he would not have done the same trick here.
No way. No.
The Jeddah trick. He wouldn't have done it here because, look, again,
gravel.
The answer to every problem in Formula One is gravel. And they just don't get it. It's Anyways, thoughts on. Thoughts on Oscar's strategy?
I just, Oscar the entire way through, I thought actually was quite good. I just think that once that happened, well, look, this is one thing. We talked about Lando and Oscar earlier. Oscar, after that moment, just got his head down and continued racing and just kind of tried to stay with Max, I think, as much as he could. Max pulled away, and I think Oscar was basically just banking on the fact that, okay, well, look, there's no point like ruining my tires trying to catch him because his tires are going to fall off. I think McLaren and Oscar were both taken by surprise of how effective the Red Bull was with its tires. Red Bull, frankly, were taken by surprise with how effective they were by the tires. So, look, I think they just were playing a race in a situation where they didn't understand the upgrades that worked, So I just think there was nothing they could do there. And look, as soon as Max probably realized his tires weren't going off, that was it. I think there was just no way of,
I think it could have worked for Oscar. I think the whole thing just turned on its head when Leclerc was just he kind of triggered the undercut, right? Very, very early. I think it was P7 or P8, and he just jumped into the pits.
Yeah, and then the VSC ruined everything for them as well. So.
We'll get to that later because I have been venting about that a lot.
I've seen a lot of people vent about that. It's a reasonable explanation.
No, but that should have been a safety car. But how it fucked Leclerc over because that was hilarious.
Yeah. And Alonso. Everyone said he was the unluckiest fucking driver in F1
in the world.
He may have a point there as well, but he causes a lot of his own bad luck, but we'll get to that.
Yeah. So it was Leclerc who just pitted early, and once he was in free air, I think that also caught a lot of people off guard because Ferrari was flying when in free air, and Leclerc, I think he ticked off almost every driver until Russell, where Russell was, I think, P4 at the time. Everyone was undercut, and then when Leclerc became perilously close to reaching a point where he would jump even Lando and Oscar, that was the time when McLaren pitted Oscar because they thought that they can replicate what Leclerc had done. Mm-hmm. That was the aim. But there was one major issue with that, and the issue was the fact that when Leclerc jumped into the pits, there was around 15-20 seconds of free air where he basically exploited everything and made up positions. When Oscar jumped in, he had a 5-second or 6-second gap in front. You don't do that in Imola, and I think that screwed his race. Where what Max and Lando did, they extended their first stint, and Oscar was just systematically, again, he did what he could do in terms of making his way through the field, but the gap remained the same.
Yeah.
And that kind of screwed things up for him. And then again, the VSC, the safety car, that made it worse.
Yeah.
To be honest.
The VSC kind of, if we hadn't got that second safety car, like Max would have won that race by like 35 seconds or something. The gap was 30.
Bonkers.
No, it was 18 seconds to Lando, right?
Yeah, 18 seconds.
He would have just won the race by 20 odd seconds.
18 seconds.
I mean, that for me showed that Red Bull had fixed the tire issues as well, because like I said, Lando just wasn't making any inroads on it at all. It was just
none. Yeah, and it's just once you see that, you're like, okay, then if you can't catch up, then the race is over. That's it.
That's the feeling I had. I was like, oh, well, this race is done.
Yeah.
So I just switched my focus to like, oh, what's going on in the rest of the grid? Oh, look,
there's always Ferrari, right?
Falling apart. Yeah.
There's always Ferrari. By the way, just putting a pin on it. The entire title battle. Now, what's your view on where do you think the title battle is going now?
This is going to be a really interesting one because, look, the thing now is that basically we're in a situation where, again, sorry Verstappen fans, but Red Bull is so close to McLaren now in terms of performance, because the biggest issue was tire degradation, right? Because, like, if Max obviously
has had 3 poles this season out of 7 races.
The Red Bull has been within 2 or 3 tenths at most races, apart from the outliers for Red Bull, which is like Bahrain, for example.
Bahrain and Miami.
Miami obviously was a situation where that wasn't actually down to pace, because in terms of just regular pace, in terms of just pace between the two cars, there wasn't a huge difference until the race, at which point the tires fell off for the Red Bull, and for the McLaren they just didn't. And it seems like at this race, Red Bull have fixed that issue with the aero. I think it'll still be an issue at certain tracks, but I think it's going to be a situation where we are going to have that lovely situation where I've said situation too much, things are going to go back and forth between different track characteristics, basically. So at certain tracks, the McLaren will just be miles ahead, and at certain tracks, the Red Bull, maybe, because it's all low-speed traction zones. So
Monaco will be miles ahead. McLaren will be miles ahead of Red Bull at Monaco. Mm-hmm. Maybe it might have challenge from Ferrari and Mercedes to a certain extent.
So I think that's the thing, is like, it's not going to be an easy championship for McLaren, because I think there's going to be tracks where they'll be miles ahead of Red Bull, but even at those tracks, they're going to, like you said, have Mercedes or Ferrari kind of be in and around, maybe even a Williams at some point. Who fucking knows at this stage? The point is, it's like
Jimmy consonants we trust.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, the point is, this isn't like a 2023 Red Bull or a 2014 McLaren or Mercedes, sorry.
2014, 15, 16.
This feels to me like a 2007, where you've got, in some ways, where you've got two very fast McLarens, but they're going to take points off each other. I think to a lesser extent, it does seem
I'd say it's because in that case there were days where Ferrari was untouchable.
Yeah.
We don't have any
less
of that
so
here.
in that respect, but I think it is
I'd
a
say
case
1984. I'm going 40 years back. 49.
Okay.
The 1986 McLaren versus the Williams, where Prost
Rosberg
beat
or Prost.
Prost won by beating Mansell and Piquet.
Okay. Was Rosberg 82?
Yo,
I can't remember. It doesn't matter.
80 is Jones, 81 is Piquet, 82 is I think 82 is
Peter Brook podcast is available. So let's not go there.
We should have him on as it's been a while.
Definitely.
He loves triggering a lot of people, by the way.
What I mean by that though is, I think in terms of just the consistent person in the championship could be Max, where he'll just kind of be in and around, taking his weekends where he gets them, like this weekend, and I think that's what could screw it up, because Lando is nowhere compared to Oscar at the minute. Well, I say no. What I meant to say is Lando is not miles off Oscar, to the point where all it will take is a couple of weekends. Like this weekend, for example, like Lando not being there, Oscar gains a few more points on Max, 2 or 3 more points.
Yeah.
So those points add up in a close season like this, and there's only 20 points now, 22 points between Max and
Oscar and Lando is 13. Between Oscar and Max, it is 22. So it's
So I mean,
one McLaren double DNF and we are golden.
Yeah. So
yeah,
I think this title fight is it's still way too close to call, which is interesting.
Also one big factor, and I think we are all sleeping on it.
Russell.
Yeah, you might laugh at this one, but I think if Ferrari fixes its qualifying, I think Ferrari might. I know, but I think if Ferrari
they're not going to win the championship, but you're saying they might influence it.
Leclerc might become a major factor, because that car was. If you take the tire life into consideration, I think Leclerc was at par with Max and.
In the race, that car was blazingly quick.
Yeah.
But to quote Lewis Hamilton, who said something similar to what he said in Las Vegas last year, if we had qualified better, we could have run that race. Yes, Lewis. Well, then fucking qualify better.